Perfect. Okay. Now that that's dealt with, I'm going to quickly introduce you to the Voter Network, one of the organizations who is, putting this on. As I said, I'm the volunteer coordinator with the Voter Network. We are a 501(c)(3) nonpartisan nonprofit organization. A lot of our work is to do with voter education and increasing voter turnout, especially in populations who really don't vote, and a lot of them, the disenfranchised population who are taken out of the system, and it's made harder for them to vote. So a lot of our work is to do voter education with them and make sure they're getting out to vote. And a lot of this work we do because democracy is the strongest when we all participate. This other Today we will have our panelists, and Mandy Todd, the from Kansas Center for Action. She will be moderating the conversation today, and I'm going to give it up to her, and you will see her now. All right.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be with you this afternoon. My name is Mandy Todd, and I'm the Director of Engagement and Development at Kansas Interfaith Action. I know some of you are familiar with KIFA, as we fondly call it, but some of you may not be. We are a statewide multi-faith issue advocacy organization. We do legislative advocacy at the state level. So we spend a lot of time in Topeka at the Capitol. We also do a lot of work outside the dome, as we call it, getting people engaged in civic life. And we do this from a faith-based perspective, a multi-faith-based perspective. We have people who are connected to our organization who are Jewish and Muslim and Christian and Unitarian Universalist, and people of no particular faith at all, people who would consider themselves spiritual. But we believe that as people of faith and conscience, we have something to say about public policy in the public square. So we do this work engaging and advocating and educating from a multi-faith perspective. So it's exciting to be doing this work with you this afternoon. We are really grateful to have some wide breadth of knowledge and experience and expertise with our panelists this afternoon. So we're going to take a couple of minutes. I always find that it's more interesting to hear an introduction from people themselves rather than me reading you a bio, which are available. You can find those on Facebook, on both the KIFA and the Voter Network page if you want to see the written bios, but we'll let folks introduce themselves. So up first, we'll have Saaliha Khan.
Hello, everyone. It is so good to see you all. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, it's such a great turnout. Thank you all for making the time to join us. Our clergy, Representative Haswood, all our community members and friends. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Saaliha Khan. I am a part of the Muslim American community here in Kansas, and I have had the honor of serving previously on the Kansas Interfaith Action staff, and now I'm one of the board members. And I am also serving in the capacity of chair of the Johnson County Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coalition, and serving the hat of mama to a 2.5-year-old and another one coming in October. So lots of fun things going on, and I'll just keep it to that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Leslie, go ahead.
Well, I likewise delighted to see many familiar faces, and thank you both, Mariam and Mandy, for pulling us together. It's funny you say written bio on the thing. I kept thinking, what's relevant? What should I put in? What isn't relevant? Whatever. But I think most people have known me from 2016 on, working with creating a small group, creating the original Indivisible Kansas City. I did that for over 4 years and ended up leading the Kansas team because although we started by state, we ended up needing to really cleave in order to properly focus on each state house and each legislative body. Up to the same shenanigans with regard to voting rights, but and that work is ongoing. So that is the only thing I would add that I didn't really put in my written bio.
Thanks, Leslie. Okay, Rodger, you're up.
Hello, friends. My name is Rodger Nishioka, and I am in my 10th year serving as one of the pastors here at Village Presbyterian Church in Prairie Village, Kansas, which sounds like we're a little quaint congregation out on the prairie lands, but actually we're a big church in the suburbs of Kansas City. We're talking about voting. I was born in Honolulu, the fourth generation Japanese American, and we moved to when I was 11 years old, moved to Seattle when my father got a new call to a church there. So I voted first when I was 18 years old in Seattle, Washington. And in the presidential election, I voted for a man named John Anderson, who was the independent at the time. And my mother and father could not believe that I wasted my vote on an independent. So that's my introduction to voting, our topic for this conversation today. Glad to be here. Saaliha said, thank you for the time. I echo that gratitude. It's significant when people offer their time in these days. So thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thanks, Rodger. Okay, Zach, you're up.
Okay. Hi, friends. My name is Zach Strum. I'm not too far from Rodger, a little down the street. I serve as senior pastor at Atonement Lutheran Church of Overland Park, Kansas. I've been here a little more than 8 years. If you have a congregation or a synagogue or a mosque in Johnson County, you might recognize me from the Good Faith Network. I was the co-president of that from 2022 to 2024. My term was up. I'm still involved with that network, but not in terms of leadership. And since that time, have started to do a little more with KIFA. And so I'm very honored to be here today and have this opportunity to share a conversation with y'all on a very, very important subject. And I do say y'all because I grew up in Texas, so you'll hear a lot of y'all from me.
Perfect. Y'all means all. It's great to be with you all. I'm so grateful. I told the panel this, but this is actually the four top people we wanted to have this conversation today. As Miriam and Moti, our executive director at KIFA, were talking, we thought, okay, who are the four people we'd really like to hear from on this topic? And I sent some requests out, and these four said yes right away. I didn't even have to keep working. So you've got a star panel today. So thank you for your introductions. This is the thing about letting people do their own introductions. You always hear something just a little bit interesting that you've never heard before. So I'm grateful for that. We're going to dive in, and so I think. I think everyone kind of stated what faith community they're representing. Saaliha is Muslim American. Rodger and Zach are both Christian pastors, Presbyterian and Lutheran, ELCA. And Leslie is representing our Jewish community today. And we know that there are similarities with our faith traditions and also obviously some big differences. But we want to really think about as you're coming from your own faith tradition, what does your tradition say about voting and civic engagement? And then how are you specifically living that out in these moments and these days that we're in currently? So I'll throw that out to the panel and we'll see what we come up with.
Well, I won't be bashful. How about that? And thank you for saying that I was here as a Jewish member of this group. But representing the community, I would not say, because, you put put 10 Jews in a room and you get about 1,000 different opinions. So at a minimum, but I can say that we do have deep faith traditions outside of what we would traditionally look to, say, in the Bible. But in the ethics of our fathers, a lot of elders are recorded. And there's one in particular who comes back repeatedly, and that's Rabbi Hillel the elder. He lived in Babylon there in the last century before the Common Era. And he had a lot to say about kindness and ethics generally, and living in community. So I pulled this one particular piece because most Jewish folk will have heard it, whether they're attending services regularly or not, engaged in some way in community issue areas, organizations. And it is, if I am not for me, for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? So it's not a specific call to voting. That wasn't something that was usually available to Jewish people in any community that they lived, and certainly not in this era that Rabbi Hillel lived. But it certainly does speak and lays very strong groundwork for thousands of rabbis to write a lot of stuff after about how we conduct ourselves in community. And one of the things I often pulled for people in my work, especially with voter engagement, is to try and unwickedify, if that's a word, the word political or politics. It comes out of a Greek root, and there are some other language and linguistics, but it's politikos, which simply means to humans living in community together in city, essentially. And so that should be the basis for all of us to find our voice, ergo our vote, and to express ourselves in that community. So that would be my basis.
That's great. Leslie, I want you to send me that quote. Others, Saaliha or Zach, Rodger?
I can jump in here. I mentioned I serve Atonement Lutheran Church, and part of what I wanted to share from a Lutheran Christian background, Lutherans have come a long way in this regard. And it's kind of good news, bad news. If you look at the history of Martin Luther, lived in Europe, 16th, 15th, 1500s. He kind of had a theology that sort of bled into some kind of Western Christianity of, the church is here and the state is here and they're separate. Luther would talk about there are two different kingdoms, and, Christians need to be involved in the church and active, and the state, okay. And that unintentionally kind of set a strange precedent where Lutherans were not always involved in civic life, kind of passive in civic life. And I think in an American context, Lutherans saw some of the things that happened in Germany in the 1930s, where a lot of Lutherans live and were sort of passive and silent, and what the state did in those years there. And it kind of woke up the Lutheran Church, like we cannot just stay on the sidelines here anymore, and sort of galvanized the ELCA. We need to be involved in civic life. We need to speak out and be engaged in civic life. This two kingdom thing, it's time to move beyond that, because God's kingdom is here too, in the political realm and the civic realm. And so that's the good news, bad news. We've learned a lot and have come back and grown from that. So today, on a national level, state level, the ELCA is I would say very involved in civic life. We have staff people in Washington. We actually have an ELCA advocacy office who lobby Congress on behalf of the ELCA and also communicate legislative updates to ELCA pastors, to ELCA members. We have state organizations that do this, state public policy offices. And that, in fact, KIFA is actually the state public policy office of the Central State Synod of the ELCA, which is all the ELCA churches in Kansas in Missouri. And so on a national state level, our church devotes a lot of time and energy and resources to staying involved civically. Congregational level, we're still kind of growing there. I think in your typical Lutheran church, you still might kind of get that old-fashioned separation a little bit. Let's not talk about politics here in the church, and this should be about the Bible. But we're growing in that regard. I know I can speak for a lot of my colleagues and myself. We're growing in that regard, and I think our congregations are starting to come around to, it is okay to talk about these things. We can do it, and not just that it's okay, but our faith compels us to. The Gospels compel us to. So we're growing in that regard in the congregational level as well.
Thanks, Zach.
Hey, thank you, Pastor. I'm going to follow the Lutheran as a Presbyterian. So while Martin Luther over in Germany was nailing 95 statements to a door in Wittenberg, we had a French theologian named John Calvin who was in the city of Geneva, sort of a second generation reformer, but in the 1500s as well. Calvin is famous among Presbyterians and Reformed Christians for writing down what are the institutes of the Christian religion. This man needed an editor desperately. It's over 700 pages in the English translation. There are some people on this screen I know, Pastor Don Wilson and others, who have memorized this. Calvin talked about the nature of God, the nature of the church, etc., and the whole last portion of his Institutes of the Christian Religion are talking about how we have to be involved in the city with the magistrates. So in an interesting twist during that Reformation period, where our forebear Martin Luther made some distinct claims. I think, Zach, you said it perfectly. We have a tradition in the Presbyterian Church from the Reform stream, the Swiss stream, saying that no, from the start, you've got to be involved. To be sure, John Calvin was sure he knew about everything. And so he was holding forth and telling the magistrates of Geneva and those in the area around what they should be doing to honor God. So right from our beginnings, we have this interaction between the church and the state. I'm so grateful, Leslie, for your wisdom about the word political. I'd love for you to come to my pulpit and preach that. We do also, like Pastor Zach, get comments about we shouldn't be political, and my comment is we shouldn't be partisan. I get that. But we have to be political because it comes out of our tradition, and we're invited, in fact, we're supposed to be involved in the civic life of our nation. King George III is famous among Presbyterians for talking about the American Revolution as that Presbyterian War. Apparently, there were Presbyterian leaders during the Revolution that were making some of the loudest claims about how we have to be independent and the tyranny of the United Kingdom, England at the time. So that's part of our tradition. But in this current context, a number of you already know this, you who are with us, it's a very difficult time. And whether you're in a synagogue or a mosque or a congregation like ours, we've got to figure out how we engage this in a way that's meaningful and truthful and still welcomes all kinds of folks. Grateful for the conversation.
Thank you, Rodger. Okay, Saaliha.
All right. Well, I'm going to share the Islamic greeting with you all that we use. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And those of you who are saying wa alaikum assalam, thank you. Blessings of peace be upon you all. So in the Islamic tradition, I can narrate several verses of the Quran, which is considered like our Bible, the Word of God. I can share with you quotes from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and various different prophets, and as well as like Muslim poets and things to share that press upon the importance of this topic of civic engagement and voting from the Islamic tradition. One of the Quranic verses that I have it's from the Surah Al-Imran in 3-104. It says, "Let there be a group among you who call others to goodness, encourage what is good, forbid what is evil. It is they who will be successful." And so in the context of civic engagement, voting, and community service, those are really the modern day manifestations of the Quranic commandment of enjoining good and forbidding evil. And there's also countless stories of prophets and messengers who had the mission of speaking truth to power. If you think of Prophet Musa or Moses speaking truth to the Pharaoh and being able to emphasize the idea of being humble, not arrogant, and worshiping God. The concept of worship in Islam is very comprehensive. It's not just about like the ritual of prayer, but also you get rewarded for doing good. And the doing good includes the idea of voting, civic engagement, activism, social justice work. So that's kind of the broader perspective. Now, in reality, sometimes Muslims in America feel very challenged by the reality of voting. Personally, as someone who feels passionate about it, I very much engage in it and advocate for it. And I'm also aware that sometimes people come from immigrant communities from previous countries that have a different form of government, and there's not as much trust. Or there's also the sentiment of like, oh, what does it even matter? And then recently, there's a lot of heaviness and grief in the community, in the Muslim community with the situation in Palestine. And so there's been a both and of does our voice and vote even matter, given sometimes how hopeless and helpless the situation can feel. And then there's the other side that we really do actually need to mobilize and come together and educate and vote and hold our leaders accountable to do the right thing on the local, national, global level in terms of promoting peace and justice. And part of that is voting and civic engagement and doing this work together. So that's a little bit of the Muslim perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really great segue into this next part of the conversation I want to lead us in. Many of you have mentioned, several of you have mentioned that the challenge of the days that we are living in right now, we are experiencing polarization, political polarization, like like I have not seen in my lifetime. And it is, I think, so I hear you as a Muslim American saying, like, does it even matter? And I want to hold that. And also, like, that resonates with me too. Like, as a white American, I'm like, does it matter? Like, and for whom? And for whom does voting matter? Like, who gets to have a say, right? And we see voter suppression happening even within our own state. In Kansas, in the last legislative session, there was legislation to end the 3-day grace period for mail-in ballots, which we know targets people who are going to have a harder time voting, the elderly, students, people who can't just take the day off, whether it's, being able to take a day off and having the right to take a day off are two different things sometimes, right? And so we see voter suppression and this rampant polarization in our world right now. And so I want to think about what does it mean right now in this moment? I love that we got some sort of historical, like each of you spoke a little bit about some of the ancient and more traditional expressions of engagement. And I think it is true to say that none of our sacred texts actually say you should go vote, right? Because the world in which these sacred texts were written, that's not the world they were living in. But here we are in this moment where we're experiencing these challenging times. So what is my question here? Like, do you agree that it is even more important for voter engagement in this particular moment. Why is that so important? And what's happening in your world, both from your, your faith tradition, but maybe you are all civically engaged in other ways. How are you bringing about engagement in voting and civic life more in these days? It was a lot.
A couple things I was thinking about. The polarization concerns me personally and as a pastor, but also I just get a sense, I think economically, we've all seen over the past 20 years, business capital in this country has been condensed into really 10%, whatever you want to call it, the 1%, the 2% of very powerful people, and kind of the rich and the poor, that the distance between them is growing. And you drive around and see there's so many huge companies now. It just seems like power is getting in the hands of a few. And what concerns me is that's also what I see happening at the political level, where that relationship with the very powerful is bleeding into our politics too, and it can come across sometimes as if, well, a handful of very powerful people are starting to control politics too. And that concerns me because that's the exact opposite of what reality is. I mean, we have some growing areas here, but we're blessed to live in a country where actually, no, the power is in the people politically. It is. It's a myth to think, only the only powerful 10% control these things. But I hear that narrative, and I'm worried when we have elections and politicians throw around the word rigged, as if there's some powerful group controlling things. People have the power. We have the power. That's one beautiful thing about our country. And I think we have to keep emphasizing that, because that's the truth. People have the power here. This is an expression of the power. And it's not just a few percent that control these things. And theologically, I see it also as an expression of freedom. That's kind of an approach I have to this. I think all our faith traditions can agree one of the greatest gifts that God has given God's children is freedom and a mind, and God loves it when we're free and make choices. And so I see voting as an expression of that too. I'm expressing the freedom that my Creator has given me in this regard. So that's kind of how I look at it.
That's beautiful, Zach. And it also ties nicely back. I don't want to stay rooted with Hillel forever, right? That's a lot of centuries and stuff. Things do change. I'm not an originalist by nature. But this, and also, Rodger, I voted for Anderson, and I also ticked off some people. I just want to say, you're not alone, man. Not alone. So when I think about this idea, if I'm not for myself, what does that mean? That means I have to understand what my values are, right? And at core, Zach, you're talking about a disruption to the ability of all of us to have conversation flowing around our core values. And so when I think about voting, as when I think about healthcare delivery, as when I think about education, my God, education is a sacred task. That is a religious value, that is a spiritual value, that is a human value. And because to me, what education does is it endows an individual with dignity, because they are then equipped with their brain to then express their values and present with dignity, as each of us has here today. And voting is the leveling field, right? It's me and Mr. Trump, same vote. And or King George from the Presbyterians were telling him, George, you've got this wrong, So I think that we have to root ourselves back in a way to, and I also come out of a agnostic family. I would say I have a father who comes out of Jewish faith, and my mother came out of a kind of hybrid Christian New England faith, and rooted in, for both of them, were this deep commitment to community and common good. And I think that was an expression for them of their values that had been inculcated, again, through the education they received formally and probably more likely more informally. So I don't want to dominate, but that's how I see us being able to tie all these wonderful threads. And I love the surah that, you show.
Leslie, can you say, you said, I love the surah, and then did it cut out for others? Will you say that again, that part?
That these are important for us to hear and know and to share. And I got a phone call, even though I had it on silent. So
it's okay.
Well, speaking of surahs, I will share another one. This is from Surah Al-Hujurat 49-13 from the Quran, and it says, "O humanity, we created you among female and male, and made you peoples and tribes so that you may get to know one another. Surely the most noble of you is in the sight of Allah or God is the most righteous among you." And again, the most righteous is defined as the good doer who is doing these good works in the community, who is spreading the good news. And so I would say that in these times of polarization and fear mongering and hateful rhetoric being spewed, the good work is the work of God, is the work of spreading promoting voting rights. That's why we're so grateful for the work that the Voter Network does, Kansas Interfaith Action does, doing the work of integrated voter engagement, voter registration drives, voter mobilization, voter engagement, and doing it in an ongoing fashion and getting creative about it and telling people why it matters. I was part of a Your Vote Matters campaign that used in-language tools, which, reached out to people in the language, whether it's Arabic or Urdu or whatever it is, the language that family speaks. And so it was a great volunteer effort. And you could see that the numbers with that relational outreach, similar to how the Voter Network does it, and in the in-language piece, people are like, how can I say no to that ask? Okay, now I know where my voting booth is, and now I'm all riled up that it does matter. Sometimes you have to, what do they say, rub the wound. Sometimes you have to remind people that, even though it's gotten numb, there is pain there, and to turn that pain into something beautiful. The wound is where the light enters, Rumi. You have to go take action. You have to go do something. And so instead of feeling disenfranchised, encouraging people that, yes, in these times of polarization and fear, your voice still matters, your vote still matters. Voter engagement is as important as ever. We're trying to do voter registration drives at the mosque, trying to encourage people to get registered, trying to get people just informed. Hey, this is when the elections are coming up. Not necessarily too political or too partisan. It's just building people who are civically engaged, which our community is a younger community as the Muslim community is a community of immigrants in America. And we have so much to learn from other communities who have been doing these initiatives. And yeah, thank you.
Saaliha, thank you so much. I love everywhere you're going. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Zach. Yes, so we agree that to vote is a sacred call. I love the language for this conversation, that it's not just a freedom gift as Americans, but it really is a sacred call. It's a fundamental theological call for us, that God calls us to this. Well, that's important, and need to state that. The other piece that you started for me, Leslie, is we also depend then in a democracy of informed voting, right? That our voters, when they go to the polls, they have to be thoughtful and they have to have information that is trustworthy. And that's part of what's happening. The destruction of all of that is so difficult right now in these days. But I think we all agree it is a sacred call. And so in our congregation, I've got a group of people, leaders who I adore, and they are very faithful in getting tables in our foyer are welcome centers, and they've got, just like Saaliha said, there's tables there to register to vote, information about voting. There's information about how you get information, and that's at times contested, and I understand that. But we're trying to just put out the breadth of information out there so that people can be informed. So yes, vote, and then also do your best to be informed when you get to the poll, when you make that vote. Those are the two pieces that are most crucial, I think, right now.
Yeah, I think you are that's exactly right. You know, I think one of the things we talk about a lot is that I'm actually sitting on my desk here is this book that I've just finished reading with the church that I pastor, and it is How to End Christian Nationalism by Amanda Tyler. And she was our keynote speaker at the KIFA annual event in May. And reading her book has been great. I highly recommend it. In fact, I'll share my book study guide, 8-week guide with you if you want to do a book study in your space. But one of the things that, you know, we have been talking about is like, what is the difference between faith-based advocacy and Christian nationalism? Because Christian nationalists will claim that the work that they are doing is faith-based advocacy. They won't use that language, but right, they are so compelled by their faith to act that they will that they are speaking from a place of faith. And I want to be really clear that when we are advocating engaging civically from a place of faith, whether that's Christianity or Islam or Judaism, what we are asking you to do is consider your sacred values, the sacred values that compel you to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly. And we do that in this country. We do that through civic engagement, through voting, right? This is the mechanism that in the 21st century United States of America we have in order to engage. And it's not the only one. We also can protest, and we also can write legislators, and we can do all of those things. But this is one of the most important ways that we can engage our faith. And so I think it's really important as we think about the rise of Christian nationalism in this country, that is really feeding the polarization in our culture and society right now. We really think about the ways that we are engaging, bringing about our sacred values, you know, working towards our sacred values that on this screen, I know that the 5 of us, I don't know how many people are on this call, the 39 of us, we hold these similar sacred values, and we bring those to the voting booth, but not exclusionary. My faith is better than yours, and so I want you to also have to be a Christian, or I mean, let's be honest, that's what we're saying. So yeah,
And Christian, white Christian, right?
right.
So Salah said this, cited the common good, right? So that's what Christian nationalism falls apart. Because the common good, really, when we vote for the common good, that's as expansive a statement as possible. That's for all persons. And that's where we refute Christian nationalism, because
Yeah.
Christian nationalism is not common good. It is for those persons with whom that definition fits. And there are a number of us on this call who are not included, and there's no apologetic about that. They're fine. So I think the major difference for us is we've got to say when you enter that vote, it's for the common good. God calls us to that. That's our awareness, and that changes and transforms our view, and it should change and transform our vote.
Absolutely.
I do agree, Rodger. I think that, you know, some of this idea of self-awareness and self-understanding that sort of is predicate for then being able to go out and attune with an open ear. I remember being in an early Heaven for Fen DEI kind of workshop. It was in the 90s, I think, and we were promoting in Kansas City both children and welfare. We used to have bumper stickers, is it good for the children? And you were supposed to lead all your meetings with that. But in the mayor's office in Kansas City, we were also promoting dinners across a spectrum of the community, and we would host at home and that sort of thing. But also it is understanding that, the things that we love about our faith or our culture or things that we bring forward as Americans, but still with these unique other characteristics in our history, is that we're looking back. And it's a uniqueness perhaps that we have. And in our uniqueness is our universality, right? And through being what we alone are, then we give to humanity what we alone can give. And if I don't open enough for Zach to give that to me, then I won't know his path as a Lutheran, and it won't enrich me, or Saaliha, or Rodger, or Mandy, or any one of us. It's just that simple. And the one other thing I want to get in here, in case I shouldn't speak anymore at all, is this notion of what we bring to voting. It's also that we have to have a vision, right? So it's great to stoke the history. It's great to learn as best we can and to be open. But if we don't also exercise the muscle of our future vision and then engineering muscle with it, so my word for this is imagineering, we don't do enough of that. We don't do enough as community. We don't do enough of it as individuals. And it's hard work, but it is infinitely rewarding. And so then you can go into a gnarly Prairie Village City Council race, right, with something that you're actually building for, and not just something you're where you reflexively saying no.
Yeah.
Which is voting.
Right. Yeah, I think, yeah, go ahead, Zach.
Just I love this conversation, and I appreciate everything that's being said. I'm taking notes too. Only other thing came to my mind, particularly about the common good, is I think at least the three faith traditions represented here with the panelists. Part of the common good is also an embrace of the most vulnerable, the marginalized, and lifting them up to the center. And my reading of the prophets, the epistles, and this is where I think Christian nationalism kind of gets it wrong sometimes. And we can think about what can a nation do to really please God? And to me, the answer is not necessarily have more people in church or have more TV programs about Jesus, but what are we doing for the vulnerable? What are we doing for the marginalized? I mean, to me, that's where the heart of God is. So that's a part of the common good. And I know y'all know this too, but I think we need to lift up also.
Yeah, I'm remembering I was listening to a podcast this morning, and I don't know who said this, but essentially they said if the gospel is not good news for the poor, it's not the gospel. And I think that's at the core, right? If the common good does not include those who are most vulnerable, it's not the common good.
Amen, Amin, as we say in Arabic, similar to amen. And that is the truth. All of our faith traditions call us to care for those most vulnerable amongst us. And as part of that is also encouraging our communities to vote, to have a voice for the voiceless. And there's a quote from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that says, "The best among you are those who are most useful to others." And the way to be useful to others is through doing this work of faith-based advocacy, of voting, putting a sacred value into action and combating white Christian nationalism and all forms of xenophobia, discrimination, hate, otherization, because it happens across cultures, unfortunately, throughout the world. And how can we help bring about justice and equity in keeping these values of justice and mercy that all of our sacred texts call us to translate them into action through very active and intentional and specific steps, such as relational voting and specific initiatives that we focus on, which I'm glad to be part of one of the groups, Muslim Policy. We try to support Muslim women who are in this space across the country of doing this work and of civic engagement and advocacy and policy work. And sometimes it can feel lonely, and yet there's a reminder that there's a group of us who care deeply and that this must continue.
Absolutely. We've been talking a lot about how we can show up in these days, even when we know that things are really challenging, and how important witnessing is, how important knowing that you're not alone, knowing. So I'm grateful for, we're at 41 people on this call now, and I think somebody left. So, the 42 people who are willing to give up their lunch today or eat it in front of a screen so that we can have this conversation. One thing that has happened over the last a couple of months that we've been getting a lot of questions and kind of it's just sort of popping up is related to what is known as the Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment, I think in 1954, Lyndon Johnson wrote this amendment to tax code that essentially says that 501(c)(3)s, nonprofit organizations cannot participate in partisan politics. And Rodger and Leslie both, I think, talked about this a little bit. This word, politics, like, man, I serve a church and I get up in the pulpit every Sunday, and sometimes people say to me, I don't understand why you have to be so political. And I say to them, Jesus was political, but Jesus wasn't partisan, right? So there's a difference here. The difference between political, being involved in the policy and the relationships we have with each other in our cities and our towns, and being partisan. And so what the Johnson Amendment did was require nonprofit organizations not to be partisan, not to promote a specific candidate or political party. So if I got up into my pulpit and said, the Green Party is all wrong and don't ever vote for them, that would be partisan. But if I get up into my pulpit and say, we need to care for the earth, and there are there's legislation on the line here that could cause problems for God's creation, that's nonpartisan, right? And in July of this year, the current administration filed some lawsuit legislation, I'm not exactly sure what word to call it, to basically say that churches should be exempt from the Johnson Amendment, that churches should be able to engage in partisan politics, to endorse specific candidates and parties from the pulpit. And this decision, it's a little bit confusing, like who actually gets to make this decision? Can the administration just say, "Oh, never mind"? The enforcement of this decision, of this amendment, has been like a little wonky from the get-go. Like who's out there, making sure that churches and communities of faith are abiding by this rule anyway. But we've been getting a lot of questions about it, and I recommend to you the work that the Baptist Joint Committee is doing. They're spending a lot of time talking about the Johnson Amendment. You can get some really good education from their website and their social media. They are talking a lot about this, and there's some movement around what will happen next. And here's the deal. I have heard some um, faith leaders who are like, this is a bad scene. We cannot allow this to happen. And I have heard some faith leaders from both sides of the aisle actually say, this is actually a good thing. We need to be able to tell it like it is, essentially. Um, and
Mandy, can I jump in really
yeah,
quickly, just for anyone on the call who is not up to speed on this? And it's a complex issue. Mandy's done a great job of it, but the piece that you left out that's key is to understand the tax exempt
thank
status
you.
for churches and the ramifications of politicizing and turning the screws in a financial way on these institutions if they were to promote one over another, one issue over another. And just to go back to your Earth example on that Green Party, remember, this was not a partisan issue back in the day, but the issues themselves have become a partisan weapon. So I wanted to clarify for folks.
Yes, thank you. That was definitely a slip on my part. So yes, there are financial implications for communities of faith that could be called into account here. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out, how it changes. I encourage you to do a little research. As a 501c3 organization, we're not going to make a statement out loud right now today about this particular decision, but we are really curious to see how this plays out. What churches are going to do, what communities of faith are going to do. And I think we think about the implications on the national level, but I've been really thinking about what does this mean at the more local level? What if the mayor candidate is in my congregation and I either endorse him or I don't? Like, what does that mean for our very, very local communities? So we just wanted to mention that. Saaliha shared a resource about how this has been playing out for local mosques. So thanks for doing that, Saaliha. I'll check that out.
I just think that we, as people of faith and people dedicated to kindness and an ethical environment in which to march forward together and sometimes struggling to still hold each other's hands, that we truly, truly, truly must find ways to engage these difficult conversations. And at the best, a reconsideration of a Johnson Amendment might lead to that. But that kind of Imagineering that I talked about before is what is predicate for these conversations to come to fruition in a way that brings value for all those who can engage, and to bring others to be engaged who have not.
Absolutely.
I want to say too, prior to coming to serve here in Prairie Village, I taught at a seminary in Atlanta for 15 years. And I would go worship at historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, which is the church, of course, of Daddy King. And at the time, Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock was the senior pastor. He actually still is. Before he was elected senator from the state of Georgia. But in many of our historic Black churches, it was never an issue about endorsing somebody from the pulpit. Many of our historic African American congregations, not all, but many of them have had no qualms about telling their membership, this is how we're supposed to vote. So it's been fascinating to see this conversation emerge and to have some of my African American church leaders say, why is this even a conversation? Except to give them more license, which I think is actually a good thing too. So, but thank you for raising it, Mandy, and thank you for your wisdom, Leslie. One of my mentors, talking about leading, preaching, says you always lead at the speed of trust. And so when your people don't trust you, your leadership is not going to matter very much. So I think part of our challenge as religious leaders in communities is to build trust, and then we lead accordingly. And I've always had that and held that in my heart. You lead at the speed of trust. So as people trust you, then leadership continues to grow. And I'm not sure how this is going to play out. And as you said, it in variety of ways is really hard to get your head around and see how it's going to work.
Yeah. Well, friends, it has been so great. I am humbled by the wisdom that you have brought to this conversation. I'm so grateful that we have recorded it so we can share with others. This is the second time that Miriam and I have actually put together what we're kind of calling this Faith in Democracy webinar, and it has been a joy to work with Miriam and to work with all four of you today this year. We want to continue to engage in these conversations, and so we are grateful. We have a couple of slides to pop up.
Just give me
Oh,
a
yeah,
second.
yeah. We're just gonna share with you a couple of things about the voter network and about KIFA's work that we are doing. We are actually super excited to do a bluegrass jam tomorrow night in Winfield. If you're anywhere close to Winfield, you should come at 6:30 p.m. It's at Island Park. And we're gonna get together and sing and play some music and think about justice and the arts. So if you're close or you want to go for a road trip, you should do that. Also, keep an eye out. We will have a series of forums. We're focusing on supporting public education this election cycle, and you'll see the cities that we will be in the next we'll start in early September, and those will run through the beginning of November. We would love to have you join us. If you're interested in having KIFA come to you, we can come to you and preach or offer a reflection at your primary worship gathering. We can come and do adult education or forums. We would love to do that. So please reach out to me. My email is there. It's mtodd@kansasinterfaithaction.org. We'd love to come visit you. And you can subscribe to our email list to learn about things that we have upcoming. You can do that QR code on the screen or go to bit.ly/KIFA emails. We would love to engage with you further.
I also want to reiterate that I will actually add these things in an email to all of those who registered. I'm just realizing there's a lot of stuff in here, and I want to be respectful of time, but so if you have to leave, please feel free to do so. If you can stay for a couple of minutes, I would love to take a screenshot after this. So if you can stay for a couple of minutes, that'd be great. One thing I want to reiterate, thank you so much, honestly, for KIFA, for collaborating on this, for Mandy, for working with me on this. Like, it has been so much fun since last year to work with Mandy on different, webinars, stuff, and brainstorming what would be, good for the time and what people need at the time and what we can provide as trustworthy resources, honestly speaking, in different communities. And I also want to thank our panelists a lot because it has been such a heartwarming conversation for me. It reminds me of a lot of work that we've been doing and makes you feel so much better that there's so many people in our small pockets of our trusted relationships who are doing this work. Since I wanted to just go over a couple of events that we also have coming up. For those of you who don't know, the Voter Network also does, we have this tool called Voter to Voter, through which we essentially do this voter engagement work with our trusted relationships that we talked about a lot, the people that you already know, the relational organizing that we do with people who are in our communities. So we have like voter to voter trainings. If you want to learn about that, you can email me at mariam@thevoternetwork.org to connect with me and learn more. We also have some, events of like ambassadors getting together. So if you want to learn more in Riley County, Topeka, Waco, and Sedgwick, we are on these dates. I will put them in, an email as well. And lastly, I wanted to say that we are doing a city to city challenge in which we are connecting with certain cities and, the leaders in those cities to increase voter turnout in that city as compared to their last local election by 5%. If you're somebody who wants to, do that work in your city or know somebody who would be interested in doing that work, please connect with me. We would absolutely love that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing because I want to see all your faces and actually take that screenshot. But once again, thank you so much, Zach, Leslie, Rodger, Saaliha, for being here, for, sharing your wisdom with all of us. Okie dokie. Mandy, do you know how to take a screenshot?
Yes, I can. Okay, everybody smile.
I struggle with this so much.
Oh, what's not working? Maybe I don't know how. Here we go. Ready, set, smile. Got it.
Yay.
Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, especially during your lunch times. Mandy, I think you can stop recording. I cannot.
Okay.